Hi, Sam.
Hi, Hannah. How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing good myself.
I am feeling slimy and bloody and burgeoning and just all goopy with it.
I was really confused there because you just took a shower, so I was like, why do you feel slimy? You just took a shower, but now I understand.
A lot of very intense things can happen in bathrooms, as we have learned.
Yeah, that is very on point for our discussion today on the substance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was so much discussion of the substance, I feel like.
The substance.
The substance? Yeah.
There's probably a part in the movie that could be considered the substance.
Does anybody get anything amputated at any point?
Yeah.
I don't know. Let's go through the plot and try to remember.
Yeah.
Okay. So we start out...
Oh, so yeah, quick disclaimer. Obviously, if you've not seen the movie and you would like to see the movie before we are about to go through the plot real quick, then you should pause and come back and listen to our thoughts afterwards. Or
if you specifically don't want to see the movie because it's really gross, then you can go ahead and listen to this conversation and we will not get too far into the gory details, or at least we won't get too descriptive about it, and we'll instead talk about the themes and references and artistry. Yeah. So what happens in The Substance? We meet Elizabeth Sparkles.
oh wow, yeah, okay. I was gonna say let's not try to do names, but you've started it now.
Yep. We meet Elizabeth Sparkles. There aren't that many names. There's only two. Do we get the name of the smarmy producer guy?
I don't think we do.
I think we just get the two names.
Yeah.
Okay, so we meet Elizabeth Sparkles. She is a movie star. She has a star on the Walk of Fame sidewalk in LA. And
do you think this is an alternate universe?
no, I don't think so, because when I think alternate universe, I think like a fleshed out world. I think that this is an amalgamation of a lot of different components and time periods in our world. So our Elizabeth has a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, and she's very happy. And she spins around and we see sparkles and confetti. And then we see all the things that happen to her star. People drop their fast food on it. They walk all over it. It gets a crack.
Yeah, and this is after, of course, the star initially, everyone's glamorized by it. Everyone's taking pictures with it. Yeah. Everyone's seemingly fairly reverent towards it.
And then the starlet gets trashed and abused.
Over time. Yeah, I think it's a gradual forgetting of the star's quote-unquote importance.
And then we cut away to a cracked egg in a lab, gets injected with something.
Actually, that's the very first scene, is the cracked egg. Yeah, the very first scene is you just see the yolk of the egg, the egg and the yolk, yeah, and then you see a disembodied hand inject the egg with some green substance, and then you watch as the egg yolk splits into two, and the egg itself then splits into two.
And now we are in the future.
Well, the future of the movie, which presumably is present day in our time. I don't think so. No? Like the future? You think it's set in the future?
No, I don't think it's set in any time. That's what I was just saying. I think it's timeless. But in the chronology of the movie,
yes,
a couple of decades past when Elizabeth got her star. She is the host of a workout program that's giving Jane Fonda, it's giving jazzercise. She looks alive and gorgeous and glamorous. And also she looks like a woman in her 50s, because she is.
In fact, it was her 50th birthday that day.
And we finish shooting our workout show and with the tagline, "Take care of yourself," which will become very significant later on. Walk down a creepy orange hallway, go use the bathroom, and in walks our smarmy producer, talking on his phone while Elizabeth uses the bathroom.
So the reason they're in the same bathroom is because the movie's very gender inclusive and all the bathrooms are gender non.
Oh, really?
No, I was totally kidding.
Oh.
Yeah, no, I think, what is it? Like they're doing...
Oh, the women's bathroom is being cleaned.
Right, so she walks into the men's bathroom real quick, goes into a stall, and then great camera work throughout this movie. you see Elizabeth, you see it from the perspective of the very end of the bathroom. So you see Elizabeth walk in and walk into a stall. There's the camera's still in the same frame.
Where the mirror is?
Not the mirror where you wash your hands. No, it's like at the opposite, like at one end of the bathroom is the door to the bathroom where you walk in. The other end is just the other end of the bathroom. And you can, if you're not familiar with a male restroom, you can imagine a line of like urinals that then the camera's at the end of that line of urinals. Sure. And so, yes. So we see Elizabeth walk in, go into a stall, and then maybe like not even 30 seconds later, we see her producer come in on the phone and using a urinal. And it's all in the same frame and there's no cut. Yeah. So I think it's a great dichotomy between Elizabeth walking in to use the restroom and then her producer coming in. Very two distinct personalities.
Yeah, you notice the difference between how they carry themselves. She is making herself small and unobtrusive and not taking up a lot of physical or auditory space. And he is the opposite of that in every way. He comes in like a storm and he talks very loudly and very obnoxiously about how old and dried up and ugly and useless she is. And she hears him decide that he needs to get rid of her, get something newer and younger and fresher. And then we see the two of them at lunch. And this is one of the most memorable images from the movie for me. And I think for a lot of people, he's eating his crawfish so disgustingly. He is just getting flesh and shell and butter everywhere. There's a lot of gross, fatty food going on in this movie. And he says, he's explaining to her that she's being let go. And she says, he says, when you turn 50, it goes away or you lose it. And then he gets distracted.
Well, conveniently, yeah. He looks for a distraction, I think, because he doesn't want to be the
bearer of bad news.
And I think, real quick, what will be interesting for our discussion later is something that I'm kind of just thinking about is the way that, especially, because up till now, we've seen Elizabeth in a very glamorous light. And up till now, we've seen a very almost vile version of this male producer, both in his mannerisms, his discussion on the phone. There's something almost kind of dirty too about the use of a urinal. And then, of course, cut to the scene of him eating with lots of close-ups of just him mukbang.
The bits of flesh coming out from his mouth.
Yeah.
He's bestial and abhorrent. It's not a subtle movie.
No.
And then Elizabeth is driving away. She's very upset. She sees a billboard with her glamorous image on it being taken down. And she is craning her neck, I think, to look at this billboard. And she gets into a car crash.
Yeah.
She's getting checked out in the hospital. The doctor cheerfully tells her it's your lucky day. You have some bumps and bruises, but everything's fine. Oh, and happy birthday. And she breaks down crying. And the doctor, like every useless man in this movie, awkwardly excuses himself.
Not before asking her for an autograph for his wife. I think it's clear that this movie is concerned with celebrities, not concerned about celebrities, but it's very much the experience of a celebrity.
Yeah.
In this aging process, and obviously a female celebrity.
So this absolutely beautiful male nurse, strikingly, uncomfortably, otherworldly beautiful, piercing blue eyes, cheekbones that could cut glass, coldly examines her spine, mutters to himself something about her being the perfect candidate. He hands her a card for the substance. He says, it changed my life. She leaves the hospital. She runs into this awkward, bumbling guy who introduces himself as somebody who she went to high school with, calls her, the most beautiful woman that he's ever seen. She puts on her best customer service smile, gets through the interaction, takes his phone number, and then proceeds to get sloshed at an upscale bar. Lots of red velvet carpeting and seating. It's looking very like 50s glam. There are stylistic elements from the 50s, from the 80s, from the 90s and 2000s in this movie. Like there's a real timelessness about it. And then the aesthetic of the substance and everything related to it is very modern startup. It reminded me of another favorite horror movie of mine, It Follows, where like the whole movie, you're not sure what decade you're in, you're not sure what season it is, and you're not sure what technology is available to everybody. You know, you see leaves falling from the trees, but then people are swimming in a pool. Nobody has a phone, but somebody has this weird like clamshell device, and it adds to the creepiness. And I feel like that was being used in this movie too. Now, full disclosure, when I went and saw The Substance, I went into it knowing nothing on purpose because I was told this is this amazing feminist body horror movie, and it is best if you go into it a complete blank slate. And I was disappointed in it for that reason. So she gets sloshed on her martinis. She wakes up the next morning. She's drinking her emergency or Alka-Seltzer or whatever, looking at a very old-fashioned newspaper. There is an ad, "Are you the next Elizabeth Sparkles?" casting call. That drives her to the point where she reaches into the trash can, where she has thrown away the card for The Substance, and she makes a phone call. And this very cold, dismissive sounding voice on the other line.
Great voice work, by the way.
Yeah.
As you said, like tech startup, cold, efficient,
Yeah.
optimized. We've been talking about that a lot lately with all of the political happenings that have been going on, but a great embodiment of that in just a voice.
So the voice gives her an address. She goes to the address. It is very creepy, industrial kind of warehouse district. She has, you know, she is so dignified and fashionable, and she has to crouch down to crawl under this door in this alley that won't open all the way. And she goes to her locker. She gets her starter kit. She brings it home. And now we are in her big, gleaming, beautiful white bathroom. This kit, it looks like a medical kit, and there is a set of instructions that say something about you switch every 2 weeks without exception. Remember...
Is it every 2 weeks or every week?
Is it every week?
I don't know. I don't remember.
And remember, you are one. And in this sequence in the bathroom, we see her undergo this medical procedure she's doing to herself.
Injecting herself with a green substance that she has no way to verify the actual validity of its components.
Yeah, and she seems kind of skeptical.
Yeah.
And she falls to the ground. And in this very birth-like sequence, out from Demi Moore's spine pops
Margaret, I think.
Also lithe and fit and beautiful, but a few decades younger. I read this scene, and because I read this scene this way, I read the rest of the movie this way, that the two share one continuous consciousness. So when this younger body emerges from Elizabeth Sparkle's body, I understood it to be Elizabeth stepping out into this younger body. Is that how you...
When I first saw this scene?
No. Especially because, like, it was shot from her point of view, and we see her by looking in the mirror.
Yeah, I don't know. There's a little bit of hindsight bias of knowing the whole movie. I want to say, though, that I think, if not initially, I think the movie did try to establish how these were almost two different people.
I thought the complete opposite. I feel like
in the sense that they became so embittered with each other, but we'll get into that.
Yeah, but that's all about self-hate.
Yeah.
Which I thought was, like, the main point of this movie.
Yeah.
Like, how many times does the movie repeat, remember you are one?
Yeah.
Respect the balance.
Yeah.
And I feel like one of the major emotional impacts of the movie was self-loathing. So, yeah, I feel pretty strongly they are one consciousness right up until they are in the same room together. So out pops this lithe, nude young woman.
I think there's also an interesting way in which I assume this movie is, I'm pretty sure, yeah, this movie was directed by a woman.
Yeah.
Yeah. In which the movie portrays female nudity. There is no male nudity that I remember. Maybe like a butt. Oh yeah, there's a butt. The guy later on.
Oh yeah, sure.
But for the most part, it's female nudity. I think there is possibly an interesting discussion there about how it's portrayed here, and especially how it starts and where it goes versus maybe in other movies, especially male-directed movies, which can tend to be a little bit more male-gazy and leery, yeah.
I mean, I definitely think there's a lot of male gaze going on in this movie,
but it uses
about
it's using that, and then it kind of takes that to its
logical extreme.
Yes, logical extreme, which again we'll get into.
So she vomits up some green stuff and examines herself in the mirror. She sets up. I said this to you while we were watching it. It struck me how much care she took with the elder Elizabeth Sparkle's body. She gives her the IV and the food for main self. She tucks a pillow or something underneath her head. She lays her out comfortably, brushes her hair out of her face, and then makes her way out into the world and to the casting.
Well, also don't forget that maybe I don't want to get too much into the body horror, but she also has to stitch up that hole in her back.
At the spine, yeah. Oh yeah. This is a body horror movie.
Yeah.
And that's a theme that you and I keep on coming back to in our conversations about it. Is a lot of the people who took issue with it, their main issue seems to be it's a body horror movie, to which we say, yes, it is. That is the kind of movie that it is.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's not what you like, you will not like it. But I don't really think it's fair to hold that against it.
Yeah.
You know, I don't watch a Fast and the Furious movie and walk out disappointed and say there was a bunch of car crashes in it. Yeah, that's what it's going to be. And so there's a conversation to be had there about highbrow, lowbrow art and horror's place in the hierarchy of cinema. Anyway, so at this point, I'm watching the movie the first time. I'm thinking, oh, great, she's going to go get some revenge on that horrible producer. That is not where the movie goes.
Mm-mm.
She gets cast
as the new Elizabeth.
Elizabeth Sparkles, but her name is Sue.
Mm-hmm.
And her dancing is a lot more hip thrusting, a lot more,
less jazzercise, more
twerking.
Yeah.
There's a lot of humping the floor.
Yeah.
Her outfit is sparkly and with lots of cutouts. And she starts to experience a lot of success.
Mm-hmm.
Things seem to be going okay.
Now, mind you, so the kind of, I guess, plot device that makes for the conflict is the fact that every 2 weeks or every 7 days, whatever the time period is, they have to switch. So now Sue is in this role where she's basically taken up Elizabeth's role in this production company as a aerobics type dancer. But she's told the company, hey, every other week I got to go take care of my mom. Yeah. Which is an interesting point in itself. So she is basically gone every other week.
And we see the difference between how Elizabeth was being treated and how Sue gets treated.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So Sue makes some alterations to the apartment,
mm-hmm.
a hole in the bathroom wall, and, sets up this dark sort of cave.
Mm-hmm.
For whichever self is not in use to get
mm-hmm.
stowed away. She takes down the picture of Elizabeth. And as she's doing all this construction, her kind of goofy, bro-y neighbor comes knocking to complain and gets one look at her and becomes like immediately deferential and flirty.
Yeah, it's definitely the old cartoon. Awooga, hamina.
Yeah, boy. But, he comes in guns a-blazing because he's expecting to talk to Elizabeth.
Right, a 50-year-old woman. Yeah.
One night, Sue goes out drinking and dancing and partying with a group of her young glamorous friends. She's got her red bottoms
mm-hmm.
and a black leather bodysuit.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the most memorable example of something that happens a lot of the time when around the time that the consciousness switches bodies, they'll have these nightmare sequences.
Mm-hmm.
There's one where she's on set and a chicken bone emerges from her stomach. Now, something that other self Sue has to do to keep herself fresh and healthy is take spinal fluid from Elizabeth and inject it into her body. Otherwise, she gets fatigued, she gets nosebleeds, she starts to break down, and she needs a little bit of extra time to hook up with this guy. So she goes and gets some extra spinal fluid, goes to finish her hookup, and as he unzips her black bodysuit, we see just like all of this viscera fall out from the zipper. And it's not something that actually happened. It's a nightmare sequence, and we wake up as Elizabeth again. And when we wake up as Elizabeth this time, because Sue borrowed extra time from Elizabeth.
More than the week.
Yeah. But not by much. Now her index finger looks wrinkled, arthritic. The nail is discolored. There's some visible veins and bruising.
Clearly it has been aged.
An aged finger. And she is horrified and so self-conscious. And she calls the substance company to complain. They explain what has done cannot be undone, and you need to respect the balance.
Mm-hmm.
And she goes to pick up her supplies from the substance.
And they ask her if she wants to stop.
Yes. They ask her if she wants to stop. And she says, will my finger go back? And they say, what is done cannot be undone. You can end your experience now as is.
Mm-hmm.
And she declines.
Mm-hmm.
We just need to respect the balance. And she's reminded again, you are one.
Mm-hmm.
She goes to pick up more of her supplies, and in the diner she runs into an old man who is clearly the nurse who recruited her in the hospital. Same piercing blue eyes. And he says some really poignant things to her, including, has she started chipping away at you? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Referring to Sue. Has Sue started chipping away at Elizabeth?
And in this outing, she also runs into the same man who Sue was hooking up with the night before. And that man is really rude to her. So we're seeing ageism and sexism happen to her. And instead of feeling resentful toward the world, she feels resentful toward Sue, who is, of course, her. Which is something that I think a lot of women can probably relate to. In the most memorable scene in the movie for me and for a lot of other people, she calls the man who she ran into outside of the hospital, who she went to high school with, and they agree to meet for a drink. And she puts on this beautiful red dress, some long black gloves because she's self-conscious about her finger. She puts on this gorgeous makeup, and she's about to head out. And then she starts fussing with her makeup and her outfit. And she's just getting later and later to this state as she keeps on manipulating and then eventually abusing herself. She can't bear to show her face. And that's when you know it's kind of over for her. She starts spending her days watching TV and gorging herself on food that does not look remotely appetizing, but looks very fatty and meaty. There's a lot of gristle. There's a lot of fat. There's a lot of globules. And she starts leaving messes for Sue to have to deal with. And Sue, in turn, speaks unkindly about Elizabeth on a late night talk show and borrowing more time from Elizabeth as Elizabeth's physical condition continues to deteriorate. By deteriorate, I mean more patches of her look more aged, arthritic,
hair graying.
Her joints look stiff and bent until eventually Sue decides to just keep Elizabeth in the dark room indefinitely. Meanwhile, Sue's career is taking off. She is set to host the New Year's Eve show.
Which is an interesting scene, too. It's about this time. Sue's been doing this for maybe a month now, switching back and forth. And so Sue has become a hot topic. That's why she gets the New Year's Eve show, because of the show's ratings. But there's
her show gets moved to more prime time.
Right. There's a very interesting scene where, and this is where Sue starts breaking down. It's around the time when Sue starts having the nightmares of body dysmorphia. The scene with the chicken bone where she feels like something poked out of her. And so they're in the middle of filming something, and then she starts to freak out all of a sudden. And then they're like, oh, well, let's rewind that and take a look, because someone's like, I think they saw something.
And she's asking for a robe.
Yeah.
Gets really demanding of a robe. She doesn't want her body to be showing
Yeah, and so everyone turns to the big screen, they zoom in on her butt. It's taking that initial glamorizing of the male gaze into like just this magnification to the point of
obscenity.
Yeah. And I think it's a great example of how even someone young and deemed so conventionally attractive can still have these body dysmorphias.
Yes. Yeah. Neither of them truly feels beautiful and safe in their own body.
Right.
And no amount of adoration and success can make her feel beautiful and safe in her own body. And when she's fully broken down, her nose is bleeding, she's got a switch, and she's got this very handsome boyfriend over. This was the scene that I was laughing my butt off at, and you were not really. I thought it was so interesting that I laughed so hard at this scene and you did not. And then there was another scene later on that you were laughing at and I was not. And it's, you know, this muscular, glistening bro that is clearly her boyfriend is there, and she switches bodies and he's knocking on the bathroom door, and Elizabeth wakes up, you know, just like fully bald, very wrinkled, hunched over, stiff limbs, and she looks like she doesn't really no person would really look like that unless they were really not cared for. And he knocks on the door and say, babe, and you know, she snarls at him. I thought it was so funny, and he eventually, you know, leaves. And this is when she has reached the end of her line. She says, I want to stop. Calls the substance and says, I want to stop. Yes, I want to stop. And they say, we're sorry that you didn't enjoy your experience. And give her an injection that she can use on Sue in order to terminate the shared consciousness double body experience. And it was by this point that I was feeling iffy about this movie because of the way that it used imagery of physical disability as horror. You see limbs that are bent, disfigured, deformed, joints that are fixed in a position that you're not accustomed to seeing joints in. And this is supposed to be horrific and terrifying. There's one shot in particular that I found kind of laughable. It was Elizabeth in the shower, and the camera panned up her body, and it was just showing an aged body, and it was playing this like kind of psycho music. It was like, isn't this horrific? And I was just thinking, I mean, no, it's just an old lady's body. It's fine. And we'll get into a conversation about it after we finish the plot summary, but it seemed like the movie was using disability a lot without having much to say about disability. It had a lot to say about self-care, about sexism, about objectification, about self-love and self-loathing. But in order to say those things, it was using images of disability without really knowing what it thought about disability. I thought. Maybe other people have a different take on that. I haven't really seen any commentary about the substance that talks about disability at all, which I think is a pretty major, forgive my unfortunate phrasing, but blind spot in the discourse about the substance.
Oversight.
And so anyway, she's ready to inject Sue with this terminating thing and changes her mind at the last second. She says, you're the only part of me that's lovable. Sue wakes up, and the two of them have this brutal fight. This was the part that you were laughing at.
Yeah, it's a great example of a great fight scene because there's more going on than just two people fighting. It's really progressing the plot here. You know, we're seeing the tension that has been building between these two selves of this person literally come to a fist fight, no holds barred. I mean, they are beating the crap out of each other. And
like that you're hearing sounds similar to if you were to take one of those hammers that used to tenderize meat and just like pound away at a piece of steak. Picture that, but it's somebody's face getting punched.
Yeah. And it's along the theme of the movie, it is very gruesome, body horror adjacent fight scene. And it's also incredibly unrelenting in how, because Sue, being the younger version, pretty much dominates throughout the course of the fight. I mean,
and Sue has forgotten that she needs Elizabeth.
Yeah. Sue is unleashing all of her rage, because I think maybe something that we didn't emphasize as much is that leading up to this, Sue has just become increasingly more disgusted with Elizabeth because of how she's been living her weeks. Sue sees Elizabeth's time as a waste. And so that's kind of how she begins to justify stealing the time from her. Yeah. And so, and again, the fight scene, I think, is an incredible embodiment of just how brutal sometimes I think we can be to ourselves. And also, I think there's kind of a very evocative component of it, of how mean we can sometimes be to older people.
Yep.
This movie is all about taking things to the extreme. But I think in doing so, and in recognizing how ridiculous it is, it does make us think about how, maybe things aren't that extreme, but there are certainly aspects of our society that reflect what is going on and why this movie is trying to say the things it is.
So Sue goes to the studio for her big New Year's Eve, and she shows up at the studio, and without Elizabeth, of course, she starts physically deteriorating. We get a little The Fly moment where she's in the bathroom, her nails are coming off, her teeth are coming out, and we get Margaret Qualley just serving face, this tearful grimace with these bloody stumps where her front teeth used to be. Just very capital A acting.
Yeah.
And she realizes she can't go on like this. She needs a better version of herself. So she decides to go back to her apartment and use the substance again.
To use the substance on herself.
She says, I just need a better version of myself. And as she's leaving, she runs into the producer and all of the board members, who are, of course, all old white men in suits, kind of gathered around her. You see this creepy...
It is funny how, now that I'm thinking about it, Dennis Quaid, his character, and then obviously the other, men ogling, there's this fishbowl effect.
Yeah, they're shot from below.
Yeah, and it is an interesting way to kind of almost reverse the male gaze.
Yeah, it makes you feel like, as the viewer, you are inside the panopticon, and all of these old men are staring at you.
Yeah, it's a great
You're taking a position of Sue in that moment.
Yeah.
And he says, aren't you happy? And she nods, and he says, then smile. And of course she can't smile with teeth because her teeth have just come out, so she gives them this closed mouth smile with tears in her eyes. And he says, oh, that's right. Pretty girls should always smile. So Sue goes home and uses the substance on herself, and we've now reached part 3 of the movie. So part 1 was Elizabeth Sparkles, part 2 was Sue, and part 3 was something Monstera.
Yeah, Eliza
Sue Monstera.
Yeah.
So, and this is where the movie, as a disabled viewer, really lost me. She emerges looking every bit like John Merrick. She has...
You're gonna have to explain John Merrick.
Oh, the Elephant Man. So she's got tumors and growths. You see the face of Sue and the face of Elizabeth on various parts of her body. And part of why the movie really lost me at this moment when I first saw it was that I first saw it in the theater. And part of the fun of seeing a body horror movie in the theater is you are experiencing it communally, and as all the gross stuff happens, everybody goes, ah, no, God, why? Out loud, and laughs and gasps and cringes together. And at this moment that the third self emerges, everyone in the theater that I was in was laughing. And when you and I rewatched it together, neither of us was laughing. And I realized what a tender scene it really is. There is soft music soft lighting. She dresses herself carefully in this blue gown. She puts earrings on. And you said to me at that moment, this is the only version who thinks that she's beautiful. And she puts a picture of Elizabeth from a magazine onto her face, adds some lipstick, goes to the studio. And at this point, things get a lot more surreal. Supposedly, this is a family-friendly New Year's Eve broadcast, but there are topless showgirls running around. When she gets to the stage door, the stage manager does not react to her at all. He says, "Oh, good, finally you're here," and pulls her right in. And we get the big third act sequence that is, for all of my issues with this movie, this was not one of them. It's a very intense, very violent third act sequence. She emerges on stage. Everybody is stunned by her.
But interestingly, it's not what you'd expect. Like you would think that people would see Eliza Monstrous Sue, and it's like there's a subtle distinction. It's like they're disgusted, but not afraid. They don't see her as a threat, I don't think. At least not initially. No. They're disgusted at her. Yeah. And it's almost as if they're judging her solely on her appearance, which, I mean, I think they are. And they've been doing the whole time. Which they've been doing the whole time. So it's almost like any of the versions could have walked out on stage to a certain extent. I think maybe there's a component of it that it's more about, this is, there's the nightmare sequences throughout. This is a very surreal movie. And I think that there's an extent to which this is an inherent fear of Elizabeth Sue, Monstero Sue's personality, that people will be disgusted with her. Mm-hmm. There's not this reaction of like fear it's not quite Frankenstein.
Well, not yet.
Right. She
starts to say, "I'm so happy to be here," starts coughing and coughs up a boob, which I found hilarious and very poetic, because we're talking about the male gaze. We've been watching the male gaze in action through this whole movie, and it's kind of an exaggeration of, I'm going to give you exactly what you want to see.
Yeah, a close-up of it, too.
And a close-up of it. And that's when the crowd starts shouting, "It's a monster," and "Kill the monster." And to me, this felt very The Elephant Man. It felt very Freaks. And she is heartbroken and confused, and she's trying to say, "No, it's me. It's Elizabeth. It's Sue. I won't hurt you." Of course, she is not in any kind of physical form that's going to last for very long, and we get the fire hose of blood sequence that a lot of people found very distasteful, to which I say, you did go see a body horror movie.
Yeah.
So that was going to happen.
and very fitting. Like if we had gotten to this point without the escalation of body horror that had been coming throughout the movie, I mean, it's not like...
If The Exorcist started with the pea soup projectile vomiting, you'd be like, what's going on? What am I watching?
Yeah.
You have to earn it.
Yeah. And they earned it. Yeah.
She deteriorates, and the final redeeming shot is of just Elizabeth's face sort of crawling around like a slimy little crab.
Yeah. There are like different parts of both women's bodies and faces. And as you said, the face of Elizabeth
is all that's left, and she crawls along the sidewalk, lands on the star, and in the final
her star, and
in the final shot we have the glittery confetti falling from the sky, the roar of the adoring crowd, and she has this last moment of bliss before her life ends,
before she dries up and
turns to
ash, and then a sweeper comes over and sweeps
her away, which is a callback to the opening sequence. So a lot going on.
Yeah.
When I first saw this movie, my biggest issue with it was that I felt like it was setting us up to watch a critique of patriarchy and the objectification of women, and how we treat female celebrities and women in general as disposable once they've aged past a certain point. But I felt that if that was the point, then why did the movie punish the woman so much more brutally than it punished anyone else? I on second viewing didn't feel that way anymore. I was ready for what the plot was going to be. I was more amenable to this morality play, this parable about self-love, that she is a tragic figure and her tragic flaw is that she cannot bring herself to love herself. It's too late.
Yeah.
And that's why the take care of yourself, remember that you are one, like those lines are so poignant. And like the fight scene where she's just beating up on herself is so poignant.
Yeah.
I did on second viewing continue to have issues with like how the film used imagery of disability to make its point without really meaningfully engaging with what disability means in this maelstrom of body image, sexism, patriarchy, sexuality, glamour, beauty. I feel like disability is such a big piece of that puzzle.
Yeah.
Because disability is such a fundamental part of humanity and embodiment in a way that most people don't want to contend with. We like to think of disability as aberration, unnatural, separate and apart, other. When in reality, unless you are walking around one day perfectly young, healthy, with all of your limbs and fingers and toes, and a piano falls on your head and you die, you will become disabled. We will all become disabled.
Yeah.
Disability is as natural a part of life as eating and pooping and having sex and dancing and singing. It is just a human attribute. It is an inevitability. And what I felt like this movie was setting up, and maybe you felt differently, was that there is the morally correct way to age that is not tragic and is not abhorrent and is not horrific, where you age gradually and naturally. And then there is the punishment aging that Elizabeth goes through, where it happens acceleratedly and in patchy ways, and that is to be feared because you have fought against nature. I think there is a reading of the movie. That is a reading of the movie. I don't think
that was the intention.
I don't think that was the intention. I think like it's supposed to be a commentary on self-love and how these forces around us make that fundamental task so difficult. And
I don't think it was necessarily trying to be prescriptive and like, here's the solution.
No, it does not give you a solution.
And it's also not, I think, trying to be an embodiment of even just women's, like every woman's experience with this. It does capture certain moments of that, but this is very much from the point of view of who the main character is, a 50-year-old celebrity who's a woman trying to continue to make a living for herself in the...
My interpretation wasn't that she needed money. My interpretation was that it was an emotional need, not a material need.
Yeah.
She needed admiration and connection. And of course, like, a comment that I've heard about this movie was, if only she had one friend. But this is not real life, right? This is a morality play about a world that is made up of all of the most sexist and cruel and vapid impulses that exist in the world that we lived in. So she's not going to have a friend. There will be no one to save her. She will have a tragic flaw and she will fall.
Yeah, and I think the movie tries to set up a relationship, a friend for her in the high school.
It's this one opportunity for connection
Yeah.
she loses out on because she can't bring herself to accept herself enough to go out and be seen.
Yeah.
She can't stand to be visible.
Yeah.
And that was such an emotionally impactful scene for me. And that, I guess that's why, like, I had trouble, especially upon my first viewing, not taking the muddled messaging and imagery around disability more personally. I took it very personally because that scene of, like, looking in the mirror and wrestling with your own self-loathing to me is so fundamental to the disability experience, the disabled woman experience that I have in my life. So then for the movie to kind of turn around and invoke disability as something that is objectively horrific is just silly to say, but the movie hurt my feelings.
Yeah. Would you say that this was an example of someone who had something they wanted to say and maybe was so singularly focused on that one aspect of it that they didn't think about how it could be viewed from people in a similar situation?
I don't know. I can't look into the director's brain. I was reminded after the first time I saw it, I was thinking about King Kong. King Kong is a movie about a giant gorilla who is brought to another continent and destroys a lot of it and develops a friendship with a human woman. And when I describe it that way, you would say, okay, that doesn't really sound like it would be about race. But anybody who knows anything about King Kong knows that it's about race. It is about racial anxieties. It is about fear of like the dark jungles of Africa and the primitive bestial lives that exist there. And like you can understand it to be a pretty racist movie, even though it is not, in fact, about Africans. And I felt the same way about The Substance, that I thought, you know, this is a movie that is not explicitly about disability. There are no disabled characters, and yet it exposes a great deal of feelings about disability. And perhaps in 10 years and 20 years, with more evolved eyes, watching this movie, we will see, you know, the same way that modern viewers watching King Kong can say, this movie has a lot to say about racial anxieties, we would maybe watch The Substance and realize this movie has a lot to say about disability anxieties about disability and aging and disabled bodies.
Yeah, that the creative directors didn't necessarily intend.
Yeah. You're not always conscious about
Oh, yeah.
that kind of the associations that you're invoking when you're trying to tell one story.
Mm-hmm.
But for that flaw, I do think it's a really brilliant horror movie.
Yeah, I would say I would recommend this movie.
I would recommend this movie. Yeah.
I guess I don't know how to recommend it in the sense like if you're okay with body horror. I mean, I think
I wouldn't recommend it to just anyone. I would say if you like your Cronenbergs, your Carpenters, your Goop and your Slime, then go ahead and watch The Substance.
Yeah, certainly if you are a body horror fan, I think you will enjoy it. But I would say even if you aren't and you're curious, yeah, you give it a try. I mean, I don't know that I've watched a whole lot of body horror prior to this.
Have you seen The Thing?
I have seen The Thing, so I guess that is body horror. There is a certain way that body horror makes you feel. It's like watching a train wreck.
Yeah.
Where it's like you want to look away, but you don't want to look away.
Different things get to different people, you know?
Yeah.
I cannot watch someone pull their nails out. I can't watch nails getting peeled off of fingers or toes. I will have to look away. But
yeah.
The Firehouse of Blood, the vomiting up of the boob, I was completely fine with that. Yeah. It was funny, and I was like fully on board.
For me, it's the needles getting injected. I'm very much, I don't like needles.
Which I think is so funny because you are a pharmacist who gives people vaccinations.
Yeah, there's an interesting thing to unpack there that we don't need to do here necessarily, but certainly since giving a bunch of vaccines, I've become a lot more okay with it. But there's still something about the way in which movies often just casually depict people injecting themselves with things that I could never see myself doing, just taking a needle and injecting it into my vein. That takes it to another level.
But I mean, you know, body horror wouldn't be fun if we weren't squeamish.
Yeah.
The fun of it is to be uncomfortable, scared, unsettled, grossed out, and to experience that with other people. And like, I guess one of the last things that I wanted to talk about with regard to the substance was how polarizing it was, and how a lot of the critics and viewers who really hated it, I think because of the genre of movie that it was. They wanted it to be a feminist art film. I think it was a feminist art film. It was also a schlocky body horror movie. I don't think those two things are contradictory.
No.
But I think there is a...
And there was great care and attention that was put all throughout this movie.
Right. I would
well,
say almost too much.
Yeah.
It was a little long, it was a little referential, but it wasn't subtle, it wasn't nuanced, and if it had tried to be subtle and nuanced, it would have made a different movie.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting which genres of movie are considered lowbrow art and which ones are considered high art. Romance and comedy and horror tend to be thought of as lowbrow, trashy. And, dramas and epics get...
War movies.
Oh, yeah, we love a war movie. We love a super special, brilliant genius boy who is dealing with a moral dilemma. But I think, something that the genres that are considered lowbrow have in common is they appeal to women, or they deal with the body. Horror is violent, and you will see a lot of mutilated bodies in horror movies. And I think through visceral images and visceral storytelling, we can get to a lot of deep truths and a lot of strong emotions. And, what could be better than that for filmmaking? But yeah, why do you think that is, that we can consider that to be cheap? We consider it to be schlock.
I was going to say the same thing as you. I don't know if it's because I've heard you say something similar before, but yeah, I think the looming legacy of patriarchy and the male influence on all of society is still at play here, even in 2025, when we're looking at how movies are received by the general public.
I remember on our first date, you asked me if I've ever read The Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir, and I said, yes, have you? I was surprised that such a handsome man would have read a piece of French feminist philosophy.
Yes, because handsome men can't read.
Not feminist philosophy.
Oh.
Handsome men read books about, I don't know.
The art of war.
Or biochemistry.
I also enjoy a good biochemistry.
Oh, well, good for you. But, the central thesis of that book is that womanhood is mired in the body, and manhood is
transcendent.
Yeah, transcendent of the body. It's ideological, it's intellectual, it's rational. And maybe something about horror movies being so mired in the body, threats to the body, that makes it feel lowbrow and anti-intellectual. Mm-hmm. That mind-body split, then it is like a very gendered split.
Mm-hmm. Very, very interesting. I think a great discussion we've had here. So watching this movie now, how do we go about living and loving in a society?
Yeah, how can we use what we learned from the substance to act in a more loving way?
Yeah.
In society. I think the substance is all about how fundamental self-love is, especially if you are part of a marginalized group, if you're a woman, if you are aging, if you are disabled. Nobody can possibly love you enough. You cannot get enough adoration from the world around you in order to fill the void that is left by the absence of self-love. That was the main takeaway from the substance, is that if you cannot love yourself, you will suffer. It is unfortunate, it is unfair that we live in a society that makes it so difficult for certain people to love themselves and so easy for other people to love themselves. But that doesn't make the work of self-love any less necessary for survival. And I also think that when marginalized people can effectively and visibly love themselves, it makes it easier for other marginalized people to do the same. And so I think my takeaway from the substance is that I will continue to strive to love myself, to love my female disabled body, and be unashamed to vomit up a boob proudly.
Yeah.
How about you?
I don't know that I can top that. I think the other point that we really hit upon, and that I think will, at least for me going forward, when I think about the substance and the ways in which it'll weave in and out of my consciousness for the rest of my life, I will think about our discussion of it, and especially how you have pointed out how it had so much it wanted to say, and that it did say, and that I think it fairly effectively conveyed about the experience of aging as a woman. But in the process of doing so, it may have marginalized other groups. Is that kind of,
At least like used pre-existing attitude toward disabled people
yeah,
in order to make a point about
the experience of aging
and aging?
yeah. So I think that's, to me, that's just a great example in the broader sense of how we can have, because I think some of the discussion that was the popular discussion about this movie was about whether it was really good or really bad. I think that's maybe too simplistic a way of looking at it. I think there were elements that were really good, and there were some elements that were problematic.
Yeah, I think it was really good, though.
Yeah, no, I enjoyed the movie. Yeah. I had no trouble rewatching it with you, like, what, a month or two after the first time I watched it.
No, but it is an intense experience. I remember I FaceTimed you after the first time that you watched it. I just happened to call you right as you were finishing it, and look on your face.
Yeah.
I have just seen some things.
Yeah, no, I did forget that, how intense the first viewing of it is. The second viewing, you're going in at least knowing. And if you just listen to this whole episode and are now going to go watch it, you'll probably won't have as intense of a reaction.
You'll be prepared.
You'll be prepared.
Yes, although, I mean, honestly, if you're sitting down to watch a body horror movie, you should know that there's going to be a fire hose of blood at some point.
Yeah. This will probably not be the only body horror movie that we review.
Oh, absolutely not. Let's watch The Fly.
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's not watch The Thing. I would need a notebook to keep track of all the dudes in that movie.
All the dudes?
So many guys.
Oh. I enjoyed The Thing.
I liked it. Yeah, there were like 20 guys.
There was a girl in there too.
My problem isn't that they were men. My problem is that there were too many of them.
Ah, okay. Yeah. All right.
Good job watching and then discussing the substance, everybody.
Yeah, I hope you have a great rest of your day. I love you.
I love you too.
We did the thing.
How long did we talk?
I don't know. It doesn't say, but